Hello, my lovely anatomists and physiologists. Michele here. Thanks for joining me for our first video for chapter 15. We are still talking about the nervous system. And I know you spent a lot of time on this topic at the end of Anatomy and Physiology Part 1. And I just want to make sure we have our grounding. So let's take just a little bit of time here to review for ourselves the organization of the nervous system. So when I personally talk about the nervous system, I like to talk about its job as quick communication. And I choose the word communication because a good communicator is doing three things, right? A good communicator is listening, observing, collecting information, thinking, processing about that information, and then finally developing some sort of response to that information. So the nervous system is doing these three things as well. The nervous system is collecting sensory information. We talked about how we collect both general sense and special sense information. The nervous system is processing that information and then also directing responses. When we talk about the nervous system, then we can divide it up into two major divisions. So we have the central nervous system, which we talk about as the CNS. And I like to think about this as really being involved in the processing or the integration of information. And then we will see that as part of that, um, let's say, develop response. And so the central nervous system includes, of course, the brain and the spinal cord. And also when we talk about the nervous system, we'll talk about the white matter as a tract, and we'll talk about the gray matter as nuclei. And we'll come back to that conversation about what is gray matter and what is white matter, just to remind ourselves about that. So then on the flip side of things, we have, I'm going to call this section involved in transmission of signals. And this is the peripheral nervous system, or what we can abbreviate as the PNS. And this, of course, is including the nerves, which can be either cranial or spinal nerves. And remember, we studied in Anatomy and Physiology Part 1 lab, the 12th pair of cranial nerves, paying attention to both the name and the assigned number. And that's going to continue in our conversations in chapter 15. When we talk about the peripheral nervous system, we can really divide it up based on function. So just to give myself space, I'm going to come over here and say that my peripheral nervous system can be divided up into either the afferent or afferent division, and then the other choice is the efferent or efferent division. So the term afferent is the pronunciation afferent is really the correct pronunciation, but sometimes it's hard to hear the difference. And so I like to emphasize afferent. And then I do the same thing for efferent division. I like to emphasize that as efferent so that you are hearing me. When we talk about the afferent division, this is the sensory collection. So this is like the listening, right? And collecting that information and taking it from the body to the central nervous system. And we've talked about this division completely. We've talked about general sense and special sense between both last semester and our discussion of chapter 14.1 this semester. When we talk about the efferent division, then what we are talking about is the control of effectors. And effectors are those tissues that are being controlled by the nervous system. And so the efferent division is very much going from the central nervous system out to the body. And so our efferent division, we can divide up into either the somatic division or the autonomic. And when we use the term soma, we are talking about body. And in this context, when we talk about somatic division, the body, we're not saying like the entire organism inside and out. Here, really, we're talking about skeletal muscle, right? So in the case when we talk about like somatic in this course, what we really are talking about is skin, skeletal muscle, and skeleton. And in the case of the efferent division, in the case of the somatic division, we're talking about controlling the effector of the skeletal muscle. And so this was talked about in detail in AMP1. We talked all about skeletal muscle, contraction, cross bridge cycle, and all of that. In the case of the autonomic division, then here we're talking about the control of the visceral effectors. I like to think of viscera as my guts, my insides, my internal organs, everything that my body is encasing, right? And so here we're controlling the effectors of the cardiac muscle, smooth muscle, adipose tissue, and glands. Glands is a huge category. This includes endocrine glands. So we do see the nervous system and the endocrine system closely connected with each other and talking together. When we talk about the autonomic division, we see there's 3 divisions here. We're going to have what's referred to as the sympathetic division, parasympathetic, and enteric. Sympathetic division and parasympathetic division are basically opposites of each other. The job of the autonomic nervous system is to maintain homeostasis of your viscera, of your cardiac muscle, your smooth muscle, your adipose tissue, and your glands. And so it's the job of the sympathetic and parasympathetic to regulate that by both maybe turning it on, turning it off, turning it up, turning it down. And so you should very much think of these as opposites. This is very much the whole topic for chapter 15. We're going to go into a lot of details on sympathetic and parasympathetic division. When we talk about sympathetic division, people often use the description of fight, flight, or freeze. So these are kind of the 3 main ways that our body does deal with a stressful situation. The parasympathetic division is the opposite, right? And so if sympathetic is fight, flight, or freeze, the parasympathetic is rest and digest, or feed and breed, or I like to say eat, drink, be merry, and have sex. The enteric nervous system, enteric is talking about your intestinal tract, your GI tract. So the enteric nervous system is dedicated to the regulation and coordination of your gastrointestinal tract. So we'll be talking more about that one as we go through. The other thing to mention here before we continue is the neuron is, of course, our smallest functional unit of the nervous system. This is the cell that is sending and receiving all of our signals, all of our communications When we draw the neuron for our afferent division, we have, remember, what is classified as a unipolar neuron. And so what that means is, let's draw a single line and then have the cell body coming off somewhere in the middle. And we have one end of the line is a dendrite and the other end of the line is the axon. Right? When we talk about the efferent division, we have instead what's classified as a multipolar motor neuron. Multipolar motor neuron. So let's draw a circle for a cell body. If you want to draw some branch-like extensions coming off the cell body to represent your dendrites, and then one long extension, which is your axon. Now, we mentioned that white matter in the central nervous system is referred to as a track. And remember, the significance of white matter is that you have myelinated axons. And gray matter in the central nervous system, we reminded ourselves, is called a nuclei. And gray matter is significant because you have neuron cell bodies. And the significance here is that an axon is that kind of transmission, right? And a cell body is processing. When we talk about the peripheral nervous system, the nerves are the white matter. So nerves are going to be bundles of axons. Axons are transmitting information. But then in the peripheral nervous system, we have ganglia. This is the plural form of the word ganglion, which is going to be gray matter in the peripheral nervous system. And so gray matter cell bodies, this is processing center. So even though I've kind of said, okay, the central nervous system is involved in processing and integration, peripheral nervous system is just transmission of signal, that's not actually fully true. So we will see some processing happening in the peripheral nervous system at these ganglia. So these ganglia are going to be super important. All right, y'all, stay tuned for our next video. We're going to get a little deeper into the autonomic, and then from there, look individually at the sympathetic, parasympathetic, and enteric nervous systems. So stay tuned. As always, take care of yourselves and each other.